afternoon. Thank you all for joining us and welcome from us all at BIE. I'm Rob Walker, the CEO, and alongside me is my colleague Catherine Osaigbovo, who will be chairing the session. Together, Catherine and I are driving the diversity and inclusion agenda, both internally and externally for BIE. We're expecting 200 people on this call, which highlights just how important we all regard allyship and its power to unlock diversity and, more importantly, inclusion. Many of you will already know us, but for those of you who are new to BIE, we're an executive recruitment firm and we're functionally orientated across finance, HR, supply chain and procurement, technology and transformation, all on either an interim or permanent basis. For more than 20 years, we've been partnering organisations to build effective leadership teams to drive the changes needed for those businesses to succeed. We've hosted several smaller events on D&I with senior leaders, enabling all involved to improve business processes and better integrate inclusion initiatives. And now we feel it is time to take this conversation to a wider audience. Over to you, Catherine.
Thank you, Rob. I'm delighted to be leading on this with Rob, as the conversation of allyship is part of our BIE inclusion programme that we're so passionate about in order for us to inform, educate and support clients on their journey through using our networks. As we all know, the past few months have been momentous. The conversation of diversity is at the forefront of both business and personal conversations, and we're now very aware that effective allyship is part of the journey in creating inclusive cultures. Today, our expert panel will help us understand what good allyship looks like and the steps we can take to get there. All three have experienced allyship from different perspectives, so hopefully you will all have some good points to take away with you from this discussion. Each speaker will have about 10 minutes and then there'll be questions and answers at the end. So please feel free to send any questions through the Q&A, not chat, stating the speaker it is directed towards. We are recording the discussion, so if you'd like a copy, please let us know afterwards. So in order, I would like to introduce Rebecca Ormond, who is the Inclusive Workplace Leader at PwC and leads a team of specialists across diversity, inclusion and wellbeing. Next is Vicky Sandry, Group General Counsel, who is one of a small number of women on Sky's executive committee. She has been with Sky 15 years and has had a stellar career with them. Then Stephen Williams, who is the Transformation Programme Director at Heathrow Airport, currently taking the organisation through its largest ever transformation programme. He has been involved with over 65 major transformation programmes in a variety of sectors around the world, and he credits the philosophy of empathy combined with a people-centred approach amongst his secrets to success. So Rebecca, I'm going to start with you. As a D&I leader, can you give us a definition of what allyship is and what it looks like in practice?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Catherine, and really excited to the discussion to talk about this as part of the discussion today. So when we talk about allyship at PwC, what we mean by that is someone bringing their privilege, power or influence to advance, support or meet the needs of another group or another individual who is typically marginalized or in some way oppressed. And I think when we can see it, we can really also feel it, because moments of great allyship, you can almost hear a pin drop. And I was reflecting on this because I think it's really easy to only see it in terms of individual characteristics. So we talk about gender allyship, we talk about race allyship, and we talk about LGBT+ allyship, which always means we're also talking about privilege. But actually that privilege, power or influence can be really small. And I was talking about this with a friend, and they reminded me of a story I told a couple of years ago where I was on the bus and we stopped at a bus stop, and at the bus stop there was someone in a wheelchair, and the driver wasn't going to stop and let that person on because there were a couple of people who needed to move out of the wheelchair bay and things like that. And as he was about to pull off, a young boy said at the top of his voice, "Why isn't the driver stopping?" And really the only privilege that he had was he was on the bus and the other person wasn't at that stage. But actually his act of allyship meant that the driver stopped, I think, reflected on his own actions and thought, no, that isn't the right choice here, stopped and the person who was in the wheelchair was able to get on the bus. So it's very easy to think that allyship is only available to leaders, it's only available to people in one context, but actually all of us have lots of opportunity to demonstrate small acts of allyship on an ongoing basis and every day. And I think that's a really important thing for us to remember, because otherwise we make allyship someone else's job, but it's all of our jobs if we're going to create a really inclusive culture.
And how do you actually get the buy-in from the leadership then? Because we can talk about the allyship, what it means, but we were looking at the practical points that you can put across. So working in for PwC, how would you say are the steps to get the leadership to engage?
So I think there are a number of things. So some of the things that you can do are actually structural, in that you can think about how you kind of embed an allyship approach in the way that you do things. And one of the things that we have, for example, have done is in setting up our employee resource groups, which we call our people networks, we've really tried to frame them around both communities, but also allies. So our gender network is gender balance and includes he for she. Our multicultural business network is framed both of people who want to be part of that community, but also people who want to demonstrate that allyship. And our LGBT plus group, which is called Shine, actually really invested a lot up front in trying to build a community of allies, as long as creating a space for people who identified as LGBT plus. So there's some things you can do like that really structuralize it. There are other things in that I think the reality is different people believe in allyship and believe in inclusion for different reasons. We've been talking about the business case for diversity and inclusion for many years. And for some people, truly understanding that is a driver for them, and they start paying attention. For other people, actually, it may not have resonated previously, but things that happen in the world, or things that their clients decide to talk to them about, or noticing what customers are paying attention to, can start to drive an engagement with that. And what does that mean for me as a leader, for example? And for other people, I think more and more people recognise the social justice elements of allyship, and they recognise that they want to be the type of person who is willing to stand up and support others. I think we're developing, not just in the UK, but actually internationally, a far greater understanding of how some groups are marginalised, and the dial is moving really quickly. And there's a big opportunity here for those of us working in the D&I space to really help organisations take a step change, and in particular, shift the behaviours that we know drive change.
So do you actually have in place then allyship training programs, the way that people started off having unconscious bias training, for example?
So actually, at the moment in PwC, what we do is we embed allyship and the skills that support allyship within work that we call inclusive leadership. So we have an approach to leadership which talks about leadership at all levels. So from the day you join us in the organisation, actually, are you thinking about what it means to be a leader? And actually what we're talking about to people now is, how do you build being an inclusive leader into that? It's not bolt on, it's build in. But if you're going to be a leader today and in the future, you really need to know how you do that inclusively. And one of the things you're going to have to recognise as part of that is the behaviours of being an ally. So what does it mean to truly deeply empathise with someone else's experience, which enables you to stand up for them when it matters? What are you doing to self-educate so that you understand where barriers might be for people that you yourself haven't previously recognised? Privilege includes recognising the limits of your own perspective. If you don't engage with how other people might have experienced the same things as you, you're really going to struggle to be an ally for them. And one of the things that we talk about a lot is about the need to speak up. So in all cultures, if you're going to create the kind of psychological safety that builds great teams that are innovative, where people trust each other, we've all got to be able to count on each other. And that also means we've got to count on each other to speak up when our needs are not going to be met. So one of the things that we focus on quite a lot is how we can help people be an upstander, not a bystander, as we frame it.
Okay. And no, lovely. That's great information there, Rebecca. Obviously, we could talk for ages, but obviously we need to move on to Vicky now. So thank you so much, Rebecca. Vicky, following on from Rebecca's definition, it'd be great to hear your experience. As a female board member, you're used to being a minority based on your gender. However, you wrote a really powerful article in March last year on becoming an ally within your business. Can you tell us how this article came about and how if it's impacted your behaviours since?
I'm very happy to do that, Catherine, and thank you for inviting me to this event. It's an honour to be here, and I'm not a diversity and inclusion professional. As you know, I'm the sort of head lawyer for Sky, and you're right that throughout my career I've really had a focus on gender diversity. Obviously, you know, being a woman and having worked part-time since the birth of my first child in 2013, I was very keen throughout my career to demonstrate it was possible to, you know, have a progress in your career even if you didn't work sort of traditional working patterns that, you know, that we all know so well. And despite the fact that 100 years ago women weren't able to become lawyers, it was actually banned by law. You know, we've made great progress in gender diversity in the law, and so at a certain point in my career I started to think less about gender diversity, because in my own department we were about 70% women actually. You know, there's 60% of law graduates now are women, and I started to think more about ethnic diversity. And one of the things that we did in my function, I was told actually by our HR function that it might be the case that people in my function who were from an ethnic minority background didn't maybe feel very safe about speaking up, didn't feel comfortable about speaking up about their experience of what it was like to be in my function. So, and I was a bit, oh, okay. This was perhaps slightly news to me. So the advice was, let's get an outside company in to do a listening exercise so that people in your team from an ethnic minority background can be very comfortable speaking up about their experiences. So we did that, and you know, I was a leader with a very strong commitment to diversity and inclusion. So, you know, to be honest, I was sort of looking forward to getting the results of the listening exercise back as a sort of validation of my awesomeness, you know, as a leader. But actually, I was shocked and really surprised by what I heard in the report. And what I heard was that people from a Black, Asian or other minority ethnic background in my team did not really feel included. They did not really feel that they could speak up. They did not really feel comfortable being themselves, and they didn't really feel that they were able to progress on an equal footing with others. And as someone who had been so dedicated to gender diversity in particular, I found this absolutely horrifying. And the other thing that my ethnic minority Black Asian colleagues said was that they felt that the leadership, which included me, was all the same, and we were all white and we were all privileged. And you know, this was very difficult for me, and my first reaction was, well, I'm not privileged. You know, how dare you say that? I've got where I am today based on my own hard work and on the merits, and I didn't come from a rich background. I didn't go to a private school. I was the first person in my family to go to university. And I think this is lesson number one really about being an ally, is it's just not about you. And I very much made this report all about me. And I'll be honest, it took me several weeks to process it, because I made it all about me as a leader, you know, me as someone who should have been doing better. But actually, it wasn't about my experiences. It was, you know, and I had to really put that aside. And so this is one of the things I wrote about in the article, about how shocking it was for me to have this experience. You know, it was, you know, the first time that I'd really started to understand that I had an advantage by virtue of the colour of my skin, which I hadn't really understood before, and I had to really face into that. So I think that was lesson number one, you know, understanding that I had an advantage, even though I didn't want to accept that, and also understanding, but it wasn't all about me anyway. You know, it was about how my colleagues were feeling. And so that was one of the things I wrote about in the article. And the other thing that happened to me, which was, I think, very important in getting to be, you know, a better ally to people, was that I was invited to attend an event at the House of Commons and speak about sort of career progression. And as it turned out, I was the only white panelist, but also the only white person in the room. And that was a complete first for me. And I don't know if anyone else listening in has ever been in, I mean, I'm sure Stephen will tell us later that he has often been in a minority based on the colour of his skin, but I hadn't ever been, really. And it was uncomfortable. And it was different. And I'd been so used to thinking of myself as a member of a minority based on my gender, couldn't quite get my head around the fact that I was in a majority based on the colour of my skin. And again, associated with being in the majority is incredibly powerful, and being in the minority can be, very difficult. And it's only really when you accept the power of being in the majority and the responsibility that comes with that I think you can use that and harness that to be a really powerful ally. So it was a real experience for me to be in that position. And I thought, gosh, it was so different. How do I get other people to think about this a bit more? So there's another reason for sort of writing the article, was to get people to think, have I ever been in a minority? Do I understand what it's like, based on the colour of my skin? And it may be different from being in a minority for other reasons, and sort of accepting without really feeling guilt, because I think that is, again, something that we hear a lot about, that if you're in the majority and you care, that you can actually, step up and be a great ally based on your position. And so that then led me on to, taking steps, as Rebecca was talking about self-education, is, well, how do I broaden my circle of friends? I mean, one of the things I've talked about is the older you get, the narrower you get, both in terms of your circle of friends, who you talk to. All of my friends are white middle class. Who are the people I follow on Twitter? Are they all the same? All of my LinkedIn connections, so starting to think about that and opening yourself up to a sort of broader network. And social media is very powerful for that. I also got myself a reverse mentor so that I could better understand what it was like to grow up in this country from a minority ethnic background, and that was really powerful as well. And so those are just a couple of things that one can do to sort of help be a better ally. So that's really the two sort of profound experiences that I had that really helped me to appreciate that I did have an advantage, both based on the colour of my skin and also as a member of the leadership. And with those advantages, I could actually be a powerful ally to help people and help things change. So that's my story, really.
Wonderful. And obviously, I know no doubt we're going to have loads of questions about the impact and the feedback from your seniors, peers, and maybe more junior people. But no, thank you so much for sharing your story there. And Stephen. So Stephen, would you mind sharing your lived experiences as a young American Black man to having now been in a position of power to be a strong ally?
Sure. Thank you for having me, Rob and Catherine. It really is an honor to be here. And I'm kind of entering into this conversation maybe from a slightly different perspective. And this is really what's so great about interactions like this, is you get a whole variety of views on things. I think all of us have had allies at some part in our lives in different ways. Sometimes it's more obvious, and other times it's not so clear. So I think maybe to understand my perspective, I do have a certain identity that, and where I'm coming from with being an American. It just is what it is. I'll just talk about that, a little bit. Being a Black male from grew up in Los Angeles in California, where racism and those types of issues you may see just from the news, they tend to be a lot more overt over there than they are here in the UK. And it is more than just stereotypes. I mean, these experiences are quite real. It is absolutely the case that there are, you're sometimes more likely to be, killed as a Black person in America than a white person. It's absolutely true. There's more Black men, for example, in prison than there are in the university system in the United States. That statistic alone really says a lot about where people are and the challenges that are faced. So all the stuff you see about Black Lives Matter and George Floyd, all that stuff is really quite real. And people are quite surprised when I talk now with the types of leadership roles and things that I currently do, to know that beginning and know some of the other things that I still have to face when I'm not, in that boardroom, so to speak. So when I was much younger, I used to get a lot of what we call in the States, DWV violations, driving while black, which means you're just in the wrong place, wrong time, driving a car, and bad stuff happens. So, I've been, pulled over, I've had guns put to my head, I've been thrown down on the pavement, beat up, arrested, all sorts of things by police as a much younger man. That's just one dimension of the types of struggles. And when you have those types of experiences, unless you actually sometimes, unless you actually lived it yourself, it's kind of hard to believe that it's actually real. And I did want to just share a little bit of a story that I think might add a little bit of context to allyship and some of the different ways that every little bit of activity can actually make a difference. So when I was much younger man, many moons ago, it's about 18, I used to work at a restaurant, and I had worked a double shift very long, and I got home about 1 o'clock in the morning, parked across the street from my house, and I just walked in the house. I wanted to cross the street. Of course, I was not at a crosswalk when I did that in front of the house, so there happened to be a police car nearby. They grabbed me, threw me on the ground, called me all kinds of names, and arrested me for jaywalking. So here I am, 1 in the morning, thrown in jail for jaywalking. I spent the night in jail, handcuffed to a bench. Then in the morning, they put me on this long chain gang where you're handcuffed with feet and hands and things, and bussed to the central processing facility. And they threw me in a cell that had about 30 really hardened criminals in it. And I'm just this young 18-year-old kid still in my restaurant uniform with this soft pastel shirt color. They took my belt and my shoelaces. I was just holding my pants up with my hand because I had nothing. And I'm thrown into the cell with no windows. It's just all shut. And I think, I was just kind of left to the wolves. And one of the things that I found happens in those situations is all the people that are there talk about why they're there. Why are you arrested? What are you in here for? So everyone's really bragging about why they're there, for a robbery or shooting someone or whatever it might be. They get to me and, what are you in here for, kid? And I'm just sniveling at this point, scared out of my mind. And I say, jaywalking. At that point, it was like a flare went up and all the people in that room just kind of turned on me. It was like red meat in the room. It's like I got these 30 guys just coming at me, and I just saw my whole life flash before my eyes that, well, this is it, that, I'm gonna die in this cell. I had no chance against, those kinds of odds. So these guys are coming at me, and then on the far side of the room, a door opens and 3 people enter the room. And these apparently were what they called a big drug lord, I think from Central America, and 2 of his friends. When these guys came in the cell, it was like the parting of the Red Sea. And all these 30 guys just walked away. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, they're not gonna kill me, but this guy's gonna kill me. So he makes a beeline straight to me. He walks right up to me and he says, kid, are you in school? And I said, yeah, I'm in school, I am. And he says, good, you stay in school. You don't want to end up like me. And he turned around to everyone in the room and he said, this kid's with me, no one touches him. And he protected me for the next 8 hours in that room and lectured me for 8 hours on the merits of staying in school and made me promise him that I would make something of myself so I wouldn't follow the path that he followed. So that to me is a really bizarre but powerful description of how an ally can just kind of show up. The moral of the story here, and why I wanted to share this with you, is that allies can come from unexpected places. And that's really something to keep in mind. And that was just a very young man then, at 18 or so. But as you get older, and I've gone through different parts of my career. One of my first engagements was at a golf company, and this is years ago in the early 90s. And back then, the golf industry was quite, honestly, it was just quite racist at that time. And the company that I worked for had literally 2 Black employees. Me and the other person that was there was a janitor. And the whole industry just had a certain perception of Blacks. So it was very difficult. The guys that hired me really wanted to try and institute change. So I was there My job was to sit in exec boardrooms and be what they called a project librarian. My job was to write down all the different programs and take notes and everything the execs were doing. But what I found really useful is that these two colleagues, they actually would prep me prior to the meeting to explain, you're about to go into a board meeting and they're going to talk about these things, look out for this, look out for that, look out for that. Then the meeting would take place, and then after the meeting, they would debrief me to explain the inner dynamics and the politics of what was going on. Stuff I never would have had the opportunity to ascertain on my own, but they took that time to explain stuff to me. And that gave me a lot of invaluable perspective that just planted seeds that sometimes took years and years to manifest much later as to, you know, what that would actually mean. And I've taken that type of example into, you know, the things that I do now, where I try my best in the ways that I can to try and be an ally for others. Because all of us on this call are in some sort of position of power and influence. You know, that's why we're here. We have an interest in stuff like this. And there's so many different areas, you know, as both Vicky and Rebecca have talked about, that are important. One of the ones, I think one of the most obvious ones, as both Vicky and Rebecca talked about, was gender bias. My approach is a bit more direct. Sometimes, I guess, I'll be, you know, running large programs or dealing with you know, certain large companies, and I will just, if I hear something that's happening in the business, you know, you hear things in positions of power as well about someone's had a hard time, someone's given them a hard time. I will just directly approach women and say, hey, have you heard about this? Have you heard about that? Are you experiencing anything? Is there anything going on where you have, you're feeling uncomfortable? And they, you know, they'll look at that and go, wow, you know, you're actually taking a chance to, you know, time to come and talk. And it's not just people in my immediate downline. It's about taking opportunities to look at people wherever they are in the organization and really just give them space and license to raise their concerns. So I had one woman tell me, oh, I'm fine. I'm so used to this gender bias. It's just guys, and that's just how they are. And I'm tough, and I'll stick it out. And thank you for asking, type of thing. And I said to her, I said, well, that's, you know, that's admirable that you have that perspective, but you shouldn't have to deal with this. You just should not have to. So please know that you can come and say something, that you can speak out about it. And what I find really interesting about that type of approach is it's not just about the conversation that I have with that particular woman, but it cultivates something, because that woman will then interact with a bunch of other people that I'll never see. Mm-hmm. And they may interact with other folks that realize, you know, they're in a position, and they'll hopefully know that it's all right to have those types of conversations and to express stuff. So it's things like that. It's things like gender pay is another kind of obvious one that's there. Many of us are in positions of power. We all run budgets. It's not that hard to figure out what someone makes. If you have two people doing the same job, just be proactive and say, hey, they're doing the same job, they should be paid the same, period. You know, and just make that assessment. I tend to do stuff like that. So far, I haven't gotten in too much trouble from HR, but I think it's that assertive kind of activist type approach, you know, that has really you know, worked well for me. And I think the last thing I'll say is, I think it's important about the conversations that we have. So all of us on this call are having you know, a conversation really about this topic. I will go out of my way to invite people into meetings. It may not be their job, it may not be something that they're directly accountable for, but if we have an underrepresented you know, type of program and there are no women represented, bring them to the table, give them a seat. That is actually important. You know, there's a saying, I believe it's, you know the power of your influence by the conversations you are invited into. So for me, the best type of allyship is to create that space for the conversations so that people have an opportunity to just have a seat at the table, because that's really how you cultivate stuff over the longer term. So those are a few of my thoughts on my journey.
Wonderful. And Stephen, how, I know you've just said that you're very direct in your approach. How's it been then when you've had maybe colleagues who haven't really understood the power of allyship, or maybe, you know, people at a similar level as you, or maybe more senior? How have they responded to your openness to embrace allyship?
I found in my experience, a big part of it is, I think it's incumbent on me to kind of, you know, let people know it's fine to have the conversation. Because oftentimes, particularly I've seen in Britain, folks are a little nervous about saying the wrong thing. And I do think intention matters. So I just say, look, let's just talk about it. If stuff comes out, you know, it's not going to hold it against you. Let's just have this conversation. And people then say, well, okay, though it's cool, we can say this. And they just may ask questions about things that they genuinely may be curious about from a cultural perspective or whatever. And that's okay. You can only really move the ball forward if you start having these conversations. So I find that once that safety is there for folks that are in these positions of power, that it's okay for them to talk. It's okay to make a mistake when talking. That helps to move the whole dialogue forward a little bit more.
Great, wonderful. Thank you so much, Stephen. So I'm going to open up the floor now to the questions. So I've had a number of questions come through, and that's actually a very nice segue, Stephen, for a question for you, Vicky. So I've got a question here. How did you overcome that defensive feeling that you've worked hard to get where you are, when acknowledging the fact that, you know, your white privilege that you said? So obviously going back to the opposite side, Stephen.
I mean, it took a while, I'll be honest. I mean, it was not just days, but it was sort of weeks of sort of getting my head around this. But I think as a lawyer, I'm used to looking at evidence. And what I had before me was evidence of what people felt. And, you know, I just had to keep reading it. And it wasn't just one person saying, you know, that the leadership was sort of privileged and everything else. It was, you know, absolutely more than one person. And so faced with that, although my initial response was sort of defensiveness and, well, you know, it actually didn't detract from my achievements at all. It wasn't saying anything about my achievements, and I should be able to sort of have the confidence to live with those. But actually I had to accept that other people I had advantages and other people hadn't had them. And I think it was just really just a question of taking the time to read the listening report and process it in my own head. And it wasn't easy, but it was just a question of you know, reading what was in front of me and living with it, really. And then turning it into something much more positive, which was ultimately the outcome. Yeah.
So in that, so it sounds like you were doing a lot of reflecting yourself, but did you reach out to any D&I colleagues that you have in-house or any HR leaders, or did you really sort of come to the, you know, the understanding yourself?
No, I think for me it was quite a personal thing, and I just had to sort of reflect on it myself. And I think, you know, by then I was probably already doing, you know, more reading and more sort of opening up of my networks. And you know, one of the things that we did at Sky was we've been working with an organisation called Business in the Community. And again, I very much recommend this organisation to anyone who's listening in. They have great resources available to help with diversity. And one of the things that we did quite early on was we did a session called Let's Talk About Race. And it was just going to the point that Stephen was making about how people feel uncomfortable, you know, talking about race. And you know, it was a session just for my senior leadership, actually, where we could talk about, you know, how you don't know what to say, and so therefore you might not say anything. You know, how do you overcome that? And you know, I mean, I thought Stephen made a great point about, you know, it's about intention. If you're well intentioned, then you can relax a lot more. So I think there are lots of things going on around me that did help me with the listening exercise. And I sort of obviously did talk to colleagues. But, you know, it felt like a sense of failure, because in talking to colleagues, I'd be like, you know, have you done a listening report? Like, is yours really bad as well? Because, you know, we're all competitive. We all want to be, you know, we all want to be good. But no, it was a personal exercise I had to work through, and it took a while. Yeah.
Lovely, thank you. Rebecca, how has Black Lives Matter movement changed your approach, if it has, within D&I and allyship in both positive or any negative ways?
So I think a lot of organisations had focused really predominantly on gender, and actually at PwC we've been focusing on ethnicity for about the last 5 years. So every metric that we hold for gender, we similarly hold for ethnicity. We have targets for both, etc., and we publish our ethnicity pay gap. Mm-hmm. And so I think for us it was an evolution, whereas I know, talking to my colleagues in other organisations, it might have been a kind of genesis piece. But what it has really helped is it's helped us accelerate some of the things that we were trying to do, because I think we had broader recognition across our organisation of the platform and the need for change. I think, you know, it is very hard to notice what is fundamentally not on your radar, and that's a process in becoming an ally that we need to get to grips with. So there were lots of people in our organisation who just didn't see it. And Black Lives Matter helped us all see a lot more. And because we'd done some pretty substantial listening exercises in our organisation, both in 2017 and in 2019, we could then also talk to people and say, and this is how this is experienced in our own culture. So actually now we can have a conversation about what we need to do about it. And actually we can really harness your commitment and your passion for change. So I think for us, it's been that acceleration piece, which has been really helpful. One of the things we've had to hold at the same time is really helping people understand that, you know, when we talk about BAME or ethnicity, we're talking about an incredibly diverse group of individuals. And it's really tempting to put people in boxes that basically say white and not white, but that's actually a really unhelpful part of the conversation. So how do we recognise that the experience of our Black colleagues may be different to our experience, the experience of our colleagues from who have other ethnicities? And how do we recognise the intersection of faith, culture, race, heritage, nationality in someone's unique experience? And that, to the point about education, it does mean you're not kind of, you know, skirting and painting by numbers. You need to actually really empathise and understand people's different experiences if you're going to make change. So that's been something to hold in the background, is this isn't about one experience, this is about an enormously diverse range of experiences within that.
And I've actually had a couple of questions come through in regards to smaller organisations. So I know all three of you are used to working in larger corporates where there's structure, but I don't know who wants to sort of put their hand up to answer this question about it. And maybe Stephen, if you've worked for small organisations, about how would you start the D&I conversations? What would you put in place for small organisations where maybe they don't have a D&I function, maybe there's only a very small leadership of a couple of people? Any sort of practical hints or tips that anyone can share to those out there from smaller outfits?
With one of the great advantages of having smaller organizations is that there's potential to be much more nimble. And the cultures that the smaller organizations have tend to be driven by the leader. So you have a founder or you know, the co-founders of the company, you know, the other ones really to really work with, to say, hey, just by your the actions that you take in running the organization, the decisions that you make with staffing, and how you put your governance together for running that company speaks volumes for things like D&I. So this is an opportunity to bake in a little bit of a broader type of structure that some of the bigger companies would have. You can really kind of get the ball rolling at a smaller level by just making a few adjustments in how you put your governance decision making together. That's a really good place to start dealing with races and stuff like that. It's about inviting people into conversations, really.
Right. And another question about reading materials. Any recommendations on the subject of allyship and maybe the wider D&I piece for good reading materials? Rebecca?
Oh gosh, there are hundreds. You know, I mean, I think for people in the UK, if you haven't read it, I would really recommend Renee Lodge's Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race. And one of the reasons why I recommend that in particular is because it does talk to the UK experience, which can sometimes get lost in the broader D&I experience. It's a great book. The other thing that I think can be really interesting is to really seek out narratives that are different to your own in any shape or form. So, you know, recently I've been encouraging, for example, people to watch Noughts and Crosses, which is actually a teen novel, but has been recently remade for, it turned into a television program where it flips the dominant culture. And it's a great thing to be looking at and noticing your own experience, you know, how you react to it. And I think it's very well done, but also just seeking out stories that are not our own. You know, if I reflect on the history that I learned as when I was coming through school, most of it didn't really even talk about women's roles, let alone the roles or experiences of people who were not white, people who might be who were disabled. So actually, where are those stories, and how can you read them? And that can exist in our pastimes, you know, watching television, watching film, our reading material, as much as the kind of D&I library, of which there are many, and there's more coming all the time. So, you know, I think a great example is what Vicky alluded to earlier. Who do you follow on Twitter? The social media is absolutely right for kind of, you know, just incrementally learning, and it's a great way to engage in this conversation.
Are there any specific books on allyship that you'd recommend?
I don't think I have a particular recommendation on allyship specifically, but I think there are some great stories of allies. I mean, I think more of the great stories are sometimes in things like blogs, like Vicky's, where you have a real lived experience of what this actually took, and the frankness around that journey has been really helpful. I think it's less for me in the book space.
Right. Okay. Lovely. Vicky or Stephen, any other books that you would recommend?
Well, certainly from my side. Sorry, go on, Vicky.
Oh, I was going to say, F.U. Hirsch has written a great book called British. I can't remember the rest of it, but the Brit is in brackets, British. Talking about her experience of not really feeling that she belonged. She was of mixed race, or is mixed race. So that's a really good one. And the other one that my husband's reading, and I've got a copy but I haven't started yet, but he's telling me it's brilliant, is David Olasaga's what's it called? Someone help me out here. But the history of Black Britain or something like that. I've got the title wrong, but that's also to Rebecca's point about what we learn at school, and more importantly, what we don't learn. So yeah.
Lovely, thank you.
Yeah, and I'll defer to Vicky and Rebecca with the recommendations for specific books. I'll just say anything by Maya Angelou. But I think that for me, it's about the conversations, and it's interacting and just getting as close as you can get to that lived experience of people that are you know, having that narrative. And the closer you get, I think, to the direct conversation, the more raw and genuine it is. So, you know, if you have any opportunities through your social media, you know, as has been discussed, or other means, just ask questions.
Great. And Vicky, a question for you. What impact did your personal experience have on your department and the wider business, and what changes have you put in place? And I suppose another question I would ask on top of that is the initial feedback from people who've read your article who maybe didn't know you're putting it out. Did you have mixed responses?
Okay, well, I'll talk about the first question first. So the changes that sort of followed. So, yeah, we definitely had, you know, change for the better within my function. And at the time I was running the UK function, which was about 120 people. So one of the things that we did, so it's both the top down and the bottom up thing. And actually this, I guess this applies to small companies as well. So we asked people if they wanted to be part of a working group called, you know, we called it the sort of Black, Asian, Minority, Ethnic Working Group, so that to give people a voice and to sort of hear their ideas. And what's really important when you set up a sort of employee network, and it was just within legal, is to give them a sponsor. So there has to be somebody on the leadership who is responsible for talking to them and helping them and taking their ideas and sort of giving effect to them. So that working group has been, you know, incredibly successful. And of course, none of this really matters unless we do actually become more representative as an organization. That's actually what it's all about. And it's not just, you know, because it's nice to do or we feel good about it, but actually it's got to translate into a more diverse workforce. And one of the things that, together with the working group in legal and through my own connections actually on social media, is that we have worked with an organisation called Aspiring Solicitors, whose aim is to get more people from disadvantaged backgrounds into the law. whether that's, you know, Black, Asian, minority ethnic, or, you know, white, underprivileged people who haven't been, you know, first in their family to go to university, or disabled, whatever it may be. And through that program, we've had 20 lawyers within Sky mentoring 40 lawyers, aspiring lawyers, as part of this program, which has been fantastic. Of course, it makes the Sky lawyers feel great because they're able to pass on that really practical experience and to help people. But it is also having a practical effect in that the people, the young lawyers that we've been mentoring, are getting themselves on summer placements, they're getting the internships, and the whole point is that eventually they get a training contract, and then they get into the legal profession, and then eventually we'll be able to recruit them, and then they'll rise to become sort of senior leaders. So those are just a few of the sort of things that have happened, you know, within my own function. What was your second question? Oh, it's gone from my mind.
The second question was about the initial response from maybe senior peers and maybe more junior in regards to reading the article.
I honestly didn't have any negativity at all. I think, and again, it was picking up on something that Stephen said, I think people just really appreciate honesty. And I think that was what, you know, the fact that, you know, everyone struggles with this, to be honest. It's, you know, working your way through this. And I thought, what I heard back from people was, well, thank you for speaking up. You know, because not everyone feels comfortable talking about this stuff. So, but I can't say that I had any negative feedback, you know, within the organisation or outside the organisation, which, you know, of course, is really positive. You know, but going back to points Rebecca was making, you know, there are such strong business reasons for having a diverse organisation, as well as it being the right thing to do, that I think we're sort of over, you know, the sort of the rights or wrongs. It's actually more on to the how now. So, yeah.
Sure. And Stephen, so in regards to you being obviously a Black man who's in a senior position, do you feel that the diversity, your diversity, has been a strength, or have you had to sort of really fit into the sort of the white culture? How have you, I suppose, become successful within, you know, I suppose the typical sort of British society?
Well, I think to a degree, you know, there is a structure that you're operating within, you know, broader culture, and there are certain things that you do need to do. That's fine. I find the most important thing is to think about what I bring to that set of conversations. You know, what things come from my background, my work ethic, my family experiences, all of that, I think, does make a difference. And there's nothing to be you know, ashamed of. I think ideally when you're out there being a leader and you're reaching out to folks and stuff, we really ideally want to get to the point where it's not such a salient thing that we're constantly looking at. That's okay. I think that we need to make sure, no matter what, that everyone feels comfortable in their space, and that they have something to say, that they have a safe space to do that. And most of the leaders that I've seen are actually quite open to that. I don't think, I've not experienced very many folks that are overtly resistant to it. Sometimes it just needs a little bit of a nudge, a little bit of a crack in the door, and then the momentum starts to build.
And then I've just had a good question actually about intersectionality. And I know that intersectionality, a lot of people see that, a lot of people may look at that as female, gender, and then obviously being more of the sort of ethnic minority side, but obviously intersectionality can be many different ways. But how would you integrate intersectionality into your D&I approach? So if I put that to Rebecca.
It's a great question, because it's really, really important. You know, there are some rooms in which I may be in the majority and where my privilege is very real, and there will be others where that's less so the case. So quite often there's an opportunity for all of us to be an ally in a different context, depending on what that context is. I think it goes back, however, to really recognizing individuals' experience are truly that individual, and that everyone's experience is shaped by intersections of, you know, what we call the protected characteristics of race, gender, you know, faith, etc. But also things that are far more personal and maybe less visible, introversion versus extroversion, all sorts of things. And that fundamentally, if you really want to be a great ally for someone, you need to really get to know them. And that's the starting point. So I would say in any approach to allyship, you need to start with that piece about how do I become a great listener and someone who's really actively paying attention to the experience of others, because it starts with that for me.
Right, okay. Now, mindful we've got 10 minutes left. There is a large bulk of questions coming into the conversation. We've talked about a couple of times about starting the conversation from a place of sort of fear of saying the wrong thing. If I can go through and ask all three of you maybe a couple of points about how you would tackle that. How would you advise people to start the conversation with that? Well, I know it's difficult to let go of the fear, but any hints or tips, practical hints or tips about how to start the conversation with D&I internally? Rebecca.
So the first thing is, I think you have to name it, that people are nervous. And they're more nervous about some aspects than others. In the work that I've been doing recently, I've definitely recognised that many of my colleagues have been more nervous about the conversation around race than they perhaps have been around other forms of D&I. So let's name that and be upfront about it. The conversation that I've been really pleased to have on a number of occasions is to recognise that if I'm not willing to sit with my discomfort, I'm effectively forcing someone else to sit with theirs. Because if I'm too uncomfortable to talk about something that I'm uncomfortable about, someone else is going to be uncomfortable. And so particularly for leaders, there's a responsibility for us to step up around that. And recognise that we can be brave enough to have that. I think you can also do a lot to create safe spaces to say this is not about, pointing the finger, but it's actually that we're on a learning journey here. And we will only really drive change if we're willing to, show the humility that accepts we don't have all the answers and we need to learn and grow. But I think there is an onus on us as leaders to be brave about it and recognise that if I sacrifice, if I'm not comfortable being uncomfortable myself, someone else is going to be sitting with that.
And Vicky, how would you respond to that in regards to challenging the fear?
So I think I'd go back to what I said before, which was that the way that we did it at Sky was that we got the business in the community to come in and run these sessions called Let's Talk About Race, which was exactly what it said on the tin. And the first one that we did, which was with my senior leadership team, which was again very white, but again it was a safe space with basically trained professionals who helped us. We had very honest conversations about, is it okay to say black? Because actually I know some organisations that were worried about putting the word black, in the press release in response to Black Lives Matter. People just are so unsure sometimes what's okay and what isn't okay. So what we then did with the business in the community sessions, we actually in-housed it, and we got people from our sort of Black, Asian, minority and ethnic community to actually deliver the training sessions. So we made it Sky. We made it fit for our company, and we took their feedback, and then they delivered the sessions themselves. So, and often it would be, sort of quite junior people who might be delivering those Let's Talk About Race sessions to sort of bigger groups of people. But, and that really, again, builds on the sort of desire that people have to make things better and to participate and to contribute to it. And those sessions are still going on today. So that was a great way for us to do that. And I think something that's as open to small companies as it is to larger companies, to harness the power that and the interest that is within your own organization, because it will be there to help do that. So yeah.
And Stephen, as a black man, it's interesting, isn't it, about the definitions of, as Vicky's just said, about people feeling comfortable using the word black, or I know from experience people wonder if I mind being referred to as a person of colour or not, or being called mixed race or biracial or whatever the different. I don't know if there's any, again, the sort of place of from fear, Stephen, about, do you have people, after Black Lives Matter, do people open up more to you about the fact that they don't know whether or not to call you a black man or whatever it may be? Did you have any of those conversations?
Well, I think if anything with Black Lives Matter has been much more about just understanding the enormity of the types of issues that people tend to face. I've had less people talk to me about whether you're Black. I mean, being American, I'm used to being called African American in the States. I come here, and apparently I'm Afro-Caribbean. So, you know, everyone has their own set of labels and stuff. I tend not to get too caught up in that, because I think that can be an issue. Again, from my personal take, it's about just giving permission. Is that intention to just enter into the conversation? And that's really a good starting point, I think, for a lot of these things. There's also a lot of other, I don't know what you call them, I don't know, non-visible or non-prominent other identities that are out there as well, folks that may be disabled or you know, deaf, or there's all sorts of other things that tend to get overlooked. And I think those are perspectives that matter as well. And one thing I think can happen with people that, you know, I'm Black, so therefore I know everything about diversity. That's not correct. There's completely other different things that have a very different reality, that I shouldn't turn my minority status into a privilege in and of itself that just adds to the problem. So we all need to be cognizant of how we're entering into the conversation. And that really sets a lot, I think, for the tone of the, you know, of the conversation that we have.
Yeah, no, of course. So I'm mindful we're coming up to the end of our session. There's been a myriad of questions coming through, and unfortunately we can't go through all of them. No, thank you so much for your time. And Rob, over to you.
Thanks, Catherine. Thank you, the panel. As expected, the time has absolutely flown by. We thought an hour would be enough, but clearly it wasn't. We've still got, I can see the number of questions asked, sort of 26, and we've nowhere near covered that. So if you do have any questions that haven't been answered, please do contact someone at BIE, or if you'd like a recording of the session, please let us know at BIE. I personally, I thought it was fascinating, and there's a lot to take away. The key to it does seem to be communication, well-intended conversations, and that's certainly, somebody asked the question, you know, how do small companies deal with it? I mean, it's something that's a challenge to us. We're a small company. I think what's really helped us is Catherine. She's facilitated a lot of those conversations, and you know, I personally have been on a journey and find it much easier to talk about some of the more sensitive areas, because Catherine is open to having conversations, and she knows that it's, you know, the intentions, or the best intentions, are there. And I think that is a really good starting point, certainly something I've taken away from here as being absolutely crucial. If I can make a plug for one thing, and picking up on a comment that Vicky made around internships, it is something that Catherine and I have become involved in, and it's something called 10,000 Black Interns. I know we have lots of different initiatives that people have running, but this is specifically, as the title suggests, it's for Black interns. It's been put together by 3 leaders in the investment management sector. They thought they would go for 100 Black interns. 100 became 200. They then decided to expand that out into different sectors. There are now 8 or 9 different sectors, including law, accountancy, insurance, recruitment, and Catherine and I are on the steering committee for that. So if you'd like to know more, again, you can ask Catherine or I, or there is now a website established called 10,000 Black Interns. And it's really gathering momentum. But for now, I'd like to thank the panel, Rebecca, Vicky, and Stephen, for your time, your insights, and your own experiences in allyship and the wider issues of inclusion. It's been really helpful and beneficial. And to everybody else, thank you for attending. Stay safe and enjoy the rest of the afternoon. Thank you.